Dusk sank heavy over the crooked little town, painting the dirt street in long shadows. The saloon door swung wide with every crash of boots, and rowdy voices spilled out like thunder rolling across a dry plain. Whiskey laughter, mean and hollow, rattled the windows of the boarding house, echoing down alleys where stray dogs slunk low. The dust swirled in restless eddies, carrying the stink of sweat, tobacco, and spilled liquor. And there he stood, still as the well post he leaned against, the wind tugging at his coat. No one knew his name. No one dared to ask. The drunkards noticed him first when the music stopped inside. 6 of them stumbled out, all shoulders and broken pride, men who had drunk too much and fought too little. Their boots slapped uneven rhythms on the street, their mouths twisted in cruel smirks. The leader, thick-necked, red-eyed, lifted his chin toward the stranger and barked a laugh that didn't belong to the hour. "Look here, boys. A statue's come to town." His voice cut the fading evening air sharper than the tuning of a fiddle. The stranger didn't stir. Not a flicker of recognition. His hat brim shadowed half his face, hiding whatever expression might have stirred there. The blade at his side was sheathed, its handle dull from years of grip, not polished like the ornaments of braggarts. His silence stretched longer than it should have, until it pressed into the air like a dare. Who in their right mind stood so calm when the night itself was ready to turn mean? Would you have held your tongue if 6 pairs of hostile eyes drilled holes into your back? The men circled. They smelled of cheap liquor, sweat baked under sun, and the arrogance of those who believed no one could oppose them. "Too good to answer." One slurred, spitting a stream of brown tobacco at the man's boots. Another wagged a finger in his face, swaying on unsteady legs. "Or too dumb to speak." Their laughter was ugly, a chorus of hyenas. Still, the figure at the well neither moved nor spoke. A woman peered through her curtain across the way. She clutched her child close, whispering, "Stay back." She knew how quickly such scenes turned, how blood stained dust faster than rain. A farmhand leaned on a corral post, his jaw tight, too cautious to interfere. And from the corner of the church, the preacher's shadow lingered, watching the silent one with something that might have been recognition or fear. The leader stepped closer, boots grinding the dirt. He reeked of whiskey, eyes bloodshot but sharp with a predator's instinct. He jabbed a finger at the stranger's chest. "Buy us a drink, mute, or we'll teach you how to sing." His voice carried the cruel edge of a man who had bullied too long and too easily. The crowd, drawn by noise, began to gather, their whispers rising into a hush. No one wanted part in it, yet no one could look away. Still nothing. The stranger's hands rested loose at his sides, neither clenched nor trembling. That quietness unnerved them more than any insult might have. "What's wrong with him?" one drunk barked. "Cat got his tongue. Or a bullet years back." They guffawed, but their laughter cracked around the edges. Something in his stillness unsettled them, though none would admit it aloud. And then the moment broke. The leader shoved him hard, expecting resistance. The stranger staggered one step back, dust puffing around his heels, then straightened again with the calm of a man who had weathered storms worse than fists. He didn't lift his chin. He didn't snarl, didn't spit. His silence was a stone wall against their noise. "Tell me, would you have endured such humiliation? Could you stand still when every eye in town begged you to explode?" The drunkards roared again, mistaking patience for weakness. "He's nothing," one shouted, tearing a chair leg from the saloon and swinging it through the air. Another kicked at his boot, daring him to move. They wanted fire, they wanted violence, anything to prove their own laughter wasn't hollow. But he gave them nothing, nothing but the cold stare of eyes that refused to meet the church steeple rising above the rooftops. Why the steeple? Why did his gaze skirt its shadow as if it burned him? The building had seen marriages, burials, prayers whispered through tears. And yet, for him, its shape seemed sharper than any knife. His jaw tightened once, only once, when the bell above caught the light of the sinking sun, casting a cross-shaped shadow across the street. He looked away as though the sight tore a wound open in him, something older than tonight, older than the men jeering at his silence. The leader noticed the flicker. "Uh-huh," he jeered, following his line of sight. "What's there, stranger?" A ghost hiding in that church. Did it rob your tongue? The cruelty in his laughter gnawed at the watching crowd. The preacher lowered his head, perhaps in shame, perhaps in recognition of what stirred beneath the stranger's silence. A bottle smashed against the well post near the stranger's shoulder. Glass shards glittered in the fading sun before sinking into dust. The man didn't flinch, not even as whiskey dripped down his coat sleeve. He merely shifted his weight, slow and measured, as though testing the ground beneath him. He did not reach for the blade. Not yet. A hush fell. Even the drunkard's laughter dimmed, as if the town itself held its breath. A coyote's howl pierced the distance, long and mournful. The wind rattled loose shutters against wooden frames. Children were pulled indoors by trembling hands, shutters drawn. Only the men in the street remained, pressing closer, louder, desperate to break the wall of silence that unsettled them more than any gun barrel could have. What would you have done then, knowing 6 men smelled of blood and trouble, and you stood alone with nothing but patience and steel? Would you have spoken at last, or kept your silence, letting it weigh heavier than any words? The stranger lifted his head slowly. For the first time, the crowd saw his eyes clearly beneath the hat brim. They were not the eyes of a weak man, nor of a coward. They were eyes rimmed with sorrow, carved deep with lines of old grief. A storm lay inside them, chained but restless, a storm menaced not by insults but by memory. He blinked once, as if fighting something unseen, and lowered his gaze again before the church bell's shadow. The leader drew back a step, unsettled without knowing why. His men muttered, uncertain. Their courage had thrived on mockery, but silence and sorrow were harder foes to strike. Say something, one demanded, though his voice shook more than he intended. Anything. The stranger said nothing. His lips parted as though to speak, then pressed shut once more. Whatever words he might have carried had been buried deep, locked behind scars no drunkard could pry open. And so he stood, a lone figure beneath the dying sun, while 6 men circled like carrion birds, laughter fraying at the edges, fear creeping in like the first chill of night. The town watched, breaths caught in their throats, waiting for the moment when silence would give way, whether to words or to something far deadlier. That was the way of the West, wasn't it? Silence never lasted. It always broke. And when it did, the world changed forever. The gang tightened their circle, their shadows stretching long across the dirt as the last light of evening sank into the earth. 6 of them, with one who fancied himself king among jackals, his grin wide, his eyes sharp even through the haze of whiskey. They were no ordinary drunks, no. These were men who fed on cruelty the way coyotes gnawed bone, not because they were hungry, but because it was their nature. Their laughter rolled in shrill, broken bursts, cutting sharper than knives, and the onlookers knew this was no game of chance. The leader spat a dark stream at the stranger's boots. Still nothing. Damn you, speak, or I'll carve words into your hide. He lurched forward, his bulk close enough to reek of rotgut and sweat. Behind him, one of the younger ones swung a broken chair leg high, smashing it against the well post. Splinters flew like sparks from a blacksmith's hammer, scattering at the stranger's feet. The crowd gasped. The stranger only shifted, slow as the turning of a clock's hand, eyes steady, his silence thicker now, heavier, filling the space like storm air. What would you have done then? Would you have let them spit on your name, shove you like cattle, grind their boots into your patience? Or would you have answered first, quick and hot, blade flashing before the laughter had time to turn to screams? Tell me, which path is braver, the silence that holds, or the fire that breaks loose? The men jeered louder, emboldened by the crowd's hesitation. One shoved him square in the chest, hard enough to stagger him back against the well. Dust plumed around his heels, swirling in the golden spill of light from the saloon doors. Inside, the piano stilled. Outside, the coyotes answered with long, mournful howls that seemed to crawl down the spines of every witness. The desert was swallowing the town whole, bit by bit, leaving only this circle of noise and tension. Another stumbled forward, sloshing half a bottle of whiskey down the stranger's coat, drenching him in cheap spirits. The scent of alcohol hung sharp in the air, thick enough to catch flame if a match had struck. They roared with delight, as if humiliation alone could satisfy their appetites. Yet he stood dripping, had brim shadowing his face, hands loose at his sides, no blade drawn. He looked like a man carved from stone, one who had chosen stillness as his weapon, though the reason for that choice remained locked tight behind those sorrowful eyes. A smaller man, wiry and quick, crouched low and darted forward with sudden spit, landing square across the stranger's cheek. The crowd groaned, a ripple of shame running through them. A farmer clenched his fists, but his wife pulled him back, whispering that this wasn't his fight. The preacher murmured low, a prayer or maybe a warning, though his voice trembled too faint to rise above the gang's laughter. The leader raised both arms, swaggering in triumph. "Look at him, boys. He ain't got the guts. Just a scarecrow dressed in rags, waiting for the wind to knock him down." His men howled like beasts, circling closer, pushing and shoving, taking turns with their insults, each one crueler than the last. Yet through it all, the stranger endured, his chest rising and falling slow, deliberate, as though his heartbeat alone kept time with the desert night. Then came the first blow. The broken chair leg, swung wide, cracked against his shoulder with a thud that echoed through the square. He staggered, his coat shifting, the blade at his side catching the faintest glint of lamplight. The crowd froze, breaths caught, waiting for steel to leap free, for blood to answer insult. But no, he straightened again, jaw tight, eyes darker than before, yet his hand never touched the weapon. Why? Why suffer such insult, unless he carried something deeper than pride? Could it be guilt that chained his hand, or a promise once made to someone buried now beneath desert soil? Every man and woman watching felt it, the weight of choice pressing on his silence, the cost of whatever vow kept that blade in its sheath. The leader's grin faltered, if only for a moment. He barked to cover it. "Hit him again. Harder this time. Let's see if stone can bleed." And they obeyed, one after another, striking, shoving, shouting, desperate to crack the shell of quiet that unnerved them more than any weapon ever had. For silence was not weakness, it was judgment. And judgment is a mirror few men dare look upon. The saloon's light glowed brighter as night deepened, spilling gold across the dusty street, painting the gang's faces in devilish hues. Beyond that circle of fire, the town lay swallowed in shadow. Coyotes sang again, their cries long and hollow, as though the desert itself bore witness to the cruelty unfolding. Mothers pulled children away, though their wide eyes lingered, unable to look anywhere else. Old men shook their heads, remembering wars, remembering men who once carried that same silence like a coffin across their backs. Again, the chair leg swung, and again the stranger staggered, bending but not breaking. The leader cursed under his breath, his confidence rattling with each unflinching rise. What sort of man stood through insult, pain, and shame without lashing back? Was he broken, or merely waiting for the perfect moment to unchain himself? And tell me, if it had been you beneath those fists, would you have waited still? Or would you have chosen the swift release of violence, no matter the cost? Which path weighs heavier on a soul? Patience that bends, or fury that never bends again? The stranger's breath steamed faint in the chill creeping into the air. His eyes flicked once more toward the church steeple, its shadow long, cross-shaped across the street. He looked away quickly, as if that sight pierced deeper than any blow could. His silence was not fear. It was burden, a cage of his own making, a promise tied to something sacred or damned. And though the men laughed louder, their laughter grew strained, brittle, choked by something none of them could name. The desert night closed in, swallowing the edges of town, and all that remained was golden light, swirling dust, and the circle of wolves who dared believe they were the hunters. The stranger stood in their midst, battered but unbroken, silence thicker than smoke, heavier than steel. Somewhere in that stillness, everyone watching knew, when it broke, the world would change. The street had gone quiet save for the heckling of the drunkards, their laughter cracking in the cold night air. Then a sound, small and trembling, slipped through the silence. "Mister," a child's voice, barely more than a breath, floated from the shadows near the saloon. The men turned, startled, and from between the barrels stepped a boy no older than 8, hair ragged, eyes wide with the kind of fear that only towns under wolves learn too young. He looked straight at the stranger, not the gang, not the crowd, just him, as if he already knew something others did not. The boy's mother rushed forward, pale as moonlight, clutching his arm. "Hush," she whispered, pulling him back, eyes darting to the gang. Not a word. She tried to shield him, to drag him into the safety of her skirts, but not before the stranger's gaze softened. For the first time since he had leaned against that well, his eyes lost their edge. They glimmered with a sorrow too old for the moment, a sorrow that spoke of small faces once known, voices once trusted, perhaps his own blood, perhaps a child buried beneath crosses out where no flowers grew. The change lasted only a heartbeat, yet it struck deeper than any blow. The gang's leader noticed, his grin spreading. "Well, well," he jeered. "Stone Man's got a crack after all. Should we fetch you a cradle, stranger? Or maybe a doll to cuddle?" His men cackled, howling like scavengers circling bone. From the corral post, a rancher spat into the dust, his voice low but clear enough to travel. "That ain't no common drifter." He pushed his hat back, squinting. "I seen him once back when cavalry blades ran red across the plains." His tone carried the weight of memory, the kind that never left a man even after decades. "I remember the swing of steel, and I swear he's the one who carried it like a demon born." The words dropped heavy into the circle. The drunkards ignored them, but the seed was planted. The crowd shifted, whispers rippled, eyes sharpened on the stranger with new fear. Could it be true that this silent figure had once carved his path through rivers of blood? That silence now was not weakness, but a chain he'd wrapped around himself to keep the world safe from whatever monster slumbered beneath. And tell me, what kind of man chooses silence when the world only understands violence? Is he a coward fleeing his past, or the bravest of all, one who carries death in his hands yet refuses to set it loose? The leader drew a knife, thin and jagged, the edge catching the lamplight like a wicked grin. "No more fun and games," he snarled. "Let's open him up, see what's inside." His men followed suit, blades scraping from belts, steel flashing hungry. One hurled a bottle across the saloon porch, glass shattering against a beam, spraying shards like a shower of stars. The crash jolted the crowd, and with it, the last threads of patience snapped. Women grabbed children, dragging them from the square. Old men slipped into shadows, unwilling to watch what was about to unfold. The piano inside went silent as a hand snuffed the lamp above it. Chairs scraped, boots shuffled, and within moments the saloon was bare. Only the wolves remained, drunk and sharpening their courage with every insult. Only the stranger remained, battered yet still unmoved, standing in the widening darkness. The storm was building, any fool could feel it. The night pressed heavier, the air sharp and brittle. Coyotes sang again, their cries warping like a chorus of restless spirits. Dust swirled in restless spirals at the stranger's boots, whispering of blood long spilled. The knives glimmered, the gangs circling tighter, each one thirsting to be the first to spill his silence into screams. Would you have stayed then, with knives hungry and eyes wild, your back to nothing but dust and shadows? Or would you have reached for steel, breaking the vow that chained your hand? The stranger's shoulders rose once, slow, as if drawing in the weight of every memory pressed against his chest. His gaze flicked again to the church steeple, its shadow stretching long, cross-shaped across the earth. Whatever he carried was bound to that shape, to that memory, and it burned more than any blade could. He turned his eyes away, jaw tight, and faced the circle of wolves closing in. The saloon doors swung once more, wind catching them wide. The last few townsfolk slipped out like smoke, vanishing into the night. Now it was only them, 6 drunkards with knives, 1 stranger with silence, and the desert watching, waiting. A storm caged in a man's heart, trembling against the bars. And when that cage broke, it would not just be the gang who paid the price. It would be the town, the land, the story whispered for years to come. The leader staggered forward, his grin twisted wide, the bottle glass shine of his eyes gleaming under the lantern's sway. In his fist, he clutched a broken saber, its edge jagged and rusted, but no less dangerous in drunken hands. He raised it high, letting the firelight dance along its cruel surface. "You think you're stone," he roared, spittle flecking his beard. "I'll carve you down to dust." His laughter echoed off the wooden walls, bouncing like a demon's call into the silent night. The stranger moved at last. A single step forward, steady, unhurried, like the desert wind sliding down a canyon. His boots whispered against the boards, a sound too soft to belong in the circle of death, yet somehow it drowned out the clamor of jeers. His silence clung to the air, thicker now, a noose tightening around the necks of every man who watched. Still wordless, still calm, still the storm waiting to break. The lanterns above the saloon flickered, shadows lengthening across the clapboard walls. The night pressed in, every star smothered by cloud, leaving only the glow of those trembling flames. Each sway of the light painted the scene anew, faces sharp with malice, blades glinting, the well at the center casting its shadow like a black wound through the dust. Boots scuffed, grit shifted beneath heels, the chorus of tension louder than music ever dared play. The leader lunged. His saber slashed through air, whistling as it came down toward the stranger's chest. And then it happened. The sound was not of a block, not of steel clashing steel, but of silence cracking open. His blade leapt free in a single movement, swift as lightning. A gleam, a whisper, then thunder made flesh. 3 men fell before breath had time to leave their lungs. One clutched his throat, another dropped to his knees, the third simply crumpled, eyes wide with shock. The crowd gasped. The gang froze. The stranger stood again where he had been, blade low at his side, breath unbroken, eyes dark with something older than hate. It had been faster than sight, faster than thought. No one saw the swing, only the consequence, the dust settling over bodies that would never rise. And now the wolves knew they had cornered no lamb. Their bravado shattered, their laughter gone, the reek of liquor on their breath soured with fear. Each man looked to the other, waiting for courage that would not come. Only the leader, drunk beyond reason, pressed on, rage hollowing his fear. He lifted the saber again, though his hand trembled. "Tell me, would you face him then, knowing death stood so steady in his hand? Would you step forward, or would you flee into the night and pray the silence never found you again?" The men faltered, circling wider now, their knives losing their hunger. The leader cursed them, his words slurring into madness. "Cowards! He bleed same as us." Yet his voice betrayed the crack in his own soul. His boots dragged heavy in the dirt as he advanced, saber raised for another strike. The stranger did not flinch. His eyes followed the man with that same sorrow, a gaze that held pity as much as doom. He turned slightly, letting the lantern's light glance off his blade. The air shimmered with anticipation, every heartbeat in the crowd loud as a drum. Another lunge, wild, desperate. Another flash. The saber split, fragments spinning into the dark, and the leader's arm split open with it. He fell back, bellowing, clutching his wound. The blade hovered inches from his throat, a silver promise of finality. But the stranger did not finish him. Not yet. He lowered the weapon, letting the leader gasp and crawl backward, dragging his pride through the dust. The others, wide-eyed and trembling, knew then the truth. This was no ordinary drifter, no silent fool ripe for mockery. This was a man carved of war, a man who had carried steel across fields drenched in red, and brought it here, bound in silence until fools dared unlock it. The storm had broken, and now the desert waited to see how far it would rage. The dust had not settled when the leader's body hit the ground, his saber shattered, his pride bleeding out into the dirt. He wheezed, propping himself on one elbow, his chest heaving as though the very air rejected him. His eyes darted to the corpses strewn across the square, then back to the figure still standing, blade low, face shadowed. His voice cracked between disbelief and terror. You're no drifter." The stranger did not answer. He stood in the lantern's flicker, shoulders broad but weary, the steel in his hand trembling slightly, as though it carried memory heavier than its own weight. The crowd leaned forward, silent, straining to hear even a whisper, for something had shifted in the air. Truth hovered, waiting to break its chains. The leader's words stirred whispers. No drifter. Then who was he? Mothers clutched their children tighter, pulling them back from the well. Men who had once laughed at him now stared with awe, their faces pale, their mouths dry. And the preacher, standing in the doorway of the church, bowed his head low, whispering a prayer as if the devil himself had just walked their street. The silence broke, not with steel, not with violence, but with a voice, rough and cracked like old wood bending under weight. "I was captain once," the stranger said. The words came slow, reluctant, as though dragged from a grave. The crowd stilled even further. No one dared breathe. He lifted his eyes from the blood-soaked dust to the dark sky, and his voice carried across the square, low but unmistakable. "I led men when the cavalry swept fire across this land. I commanded the charge. My blade carved nightmares where corn once grew and children once laughed." The leader's lips trembled. He tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat, strangled by fear. "Lies," he whispered, but no conviction followed. The stranger's gaze drifted to the church steeple, its cross now glinting faintly against the night. His hand tightened around the hilt as if the sight burned him. "We cut through villages," he murmured, voice hoarse with memory. "I watched fire eat walls, and steel cut down those who couldn't lift arms to fight. Men cheered my name then. They called me victor. But I saw the eyes of the fallen long after. They haunt me still. I swore never to draw again. I laid this blade down, left war behind." He lowered his head, closing his eyes. "And still it finds me." The words struck harder than any slash of steel. They stripped away the silence, bearing not strength, but wounds too deep to heal. The crowds all thickened into dread. Mothers pulled their children back into their arms, shielding small eyes from the figure who had once carried fire across the plains. Men whispered his name to one another. Some swore they'd heard of him, others denied, but all felt the truth in the way his shoulders sagged beneath invisible weight. The preacher stepped forward, hand raised as though to calm the storm that no one could see. "Lord," he whispered, voice trembling, "forgive the sins of men, for they know not what they unleash." The leader crawled backward, dirt grinding into his palms, eyes wild. "Monster," he spat, though fear stole the strength from the word. "Butcher." His curses sounded more like pleas than insults. The stranger turned, eyes sweeping the dying and the living alike. He did not gloat, did not boast of victory. His blade lowered to his side, the edge stained with the night's truth, not triumph. He stepped past the groaning men, his boots dragging dust over their blood. The silence around him grew heavier than the echoes of gunfire, pressing down on every heart until even the coyotes beyond town fell still. He passed the mother who had pulled her boy from the shadows earlier. She clutched the child so tight his face buried in her dress. The stranger's eyes softened once more, just for a moment, as though seeing someone who was not there, a child long gone, a face remembered in dreams that left him waking with fists clenched. He gave no word, only the faintest nod, before moving on. Would you have judged him then, for the past he could not bury? Or would you have pitied him, a man shackled by his own deeds, cursed to carry silence heavier than any chain? The townsfolk parted as he walked. No one reached out, no one stopped him. Awe and terror are kin, and both held them frozen. The night air trembled with the weight of a legend unmasked, and the people of that town would forever remember how a stranger's silence broke into words that cut sharper than his blade. When he reached the edge of the square, he paused only once, glancing back at the cross-shadowed church, his face carved in grief. Then he turned away, steps carrying him into the desert dark, leaving behind a silence heavier than any victory cry, heavier than the toll of any bell. The square lay broken in silence, the kind that comes after thunder when the world holds its breath. The saloon's lanterns burned low, their flames wavering over smashed glass, overturned chairs, and blood darkening the dust. The air reeked of whiskey, smoke, and iron, a stench that clung to every wall, every board, as though the town itself would never forget what it had witnessed. The bodies of the fallen lay sprawled in crooked shapes, their laughter extinguished forever. The wounded whimpered, clutching their cuts with trembling hands, but no one dared approach them. No one dared step into the circle where the stranger had stood. And yet he was gone. vanished without a sound, as if the desert itself had opened its arms and swallowed him whole. One heartbeat he stood there, blade lowered, eyes carved hollow by memory. The next, only dust marked the place where his boots had pressed. The people blinked, expecting to see him still, but there was nothing, only the echo of silence, heavier now than the gunfire they had feared. A woman knelt at the saloon's doorway, cradling her boy who had whispered to the stranger. "Don't look," she murmured, shielding the child's eyes from the blood, though she herself could not look away from the emptiness left behind. The preacher leaned against the church post, lips moving in a prayer that faltered as he spoke, as though unsure whether to bless or condemn what he had seen. And the rancher who had named him captain spat once more, though this time it was not contempt but resignation. "Ain't no stopping a man like that," he muttered. "Not with chains, not with bullets, not even with his own will." The night dragged on, the town wrapped in unease. Windows shuttered, lamps dimmed, yet no one slept. Mothers held children tighter. Men poured drinks with shaking hands, and the coyotes in the distance gave wide berth to the square, as if even beasts understood what had passed. The silence grew into a story before dawn had even touched the horizon. Whispers carried from one house to the next. The stranger with the blade, the storm in his silence, the death he carried in his hands, yet never claimed his triumph. By morning, the trail he left was already cooling under the desert sky. A few brave souls rose early, hoping to catch sight of him, but found only the imprint of his boots stretched toward the horizon. His shadow lingered in their minds more than the marks in the dust. The town had been scarred, but so too had it been given something else. Fear wrapped in awe, the kind of tale that outlives men and finds a home in folklore. As dawn broke, a sliver of sun split the sky open, pouring gold over the desert. Far out where the land met the heavens, his figure cut against the light, a lone riderless man walking into emptiness. His shadow stretched long, black across the sand, reaching like a wound across the earth itself. And in his hand, the blade glinted one last time, a shimmer so brief it seemed the sun itself was swallowing it whole. Then the light grew, and he was gone, consumed by horizon, by silence, by legend. Now tell me this, if silence can kill louder than guns, what kind of man was he? What kind of legend takes shape in the dust, spoken in whispers where children listen wide-eyed, and old men lower their voices, as though afraid the tale might summon him back? Some would call it justice, that he cut down the wolves who preyed on the weak. Others would call it vengeance, a man cursed by a past of blood only able to answer cruelty with more. And still some would claim it was death itself, cloaked in silence, walking the earth until the desert swallows him again. So which is it? When the West whispers his name through creaking boards and rattling shutters, do you hear the voice of justice, or do you hear death wearing another face?